Hi, I forgot to say who I am and what I'm doing here. My name is Sonia. This is an enthusiastic reader, and it's been about 7 weeks since I did a video, so I wanted to talk about my experience reading Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, and then also reading a novel about Thomas Mann's life called The Magician by Colm Toibin, and that's what I will be discussing. So the camera is going to look a little bit different now. Here's the video. This is the beginning of the foreword in Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain. The story of Hans Castorp that we intend to tell here, not for his sake, for the reader will come to know him as a perfectly ordinary if engaging young man, but for the sake of the story itself, which seems to us to be very much worth telling, although in Hans Castorp's favor it should be noted that it is his story and that not every story happens to everybody, is a story that took place long ago and is, so to speak, covered with the patina of history and must necessarily be told with verbs whose tense is that of the deepest past. And so this storyteller will not be finished telling our Hans story in only a moment or two. The 7 days in 1 week will not suffice, nor will 7 months. It will be best for him if he is not all too clear about the number of earthly days that will pass as the tale weaves its web about him. For God's sakes, surely it cannot be as long as 7 years. And with that, we begin. I undertook this reading The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann this summer. I expected to read it during the month of July, but instead it took me 2 full months of reading this book and puzzling over it, making notes, underlining. I didn't have a digital copy because there isn't one available with this translation. The translation is by John E. Woods and from the German. So I just spent a lot of time reading little chunks of pages at a time, thinking about it, laughing every time the narrator, who is very aware and meta that we are reading a novel together, talks about time and how it expands and contracts and how our perception of time as readers of this particular story are going to expand and contract. And that's exactly what happened, because part of the story would move along at quite a clip and you would be very enthralled in what's happening, and then time would slow down drastically while 2 side characters decide to argue about socialism versus religion, any of the things that were happening during the time that Hans was in the sanatorium, which was the build-up to the war and revolution in Russia, and all the things that were going to happen were right here in this book. And so there would be times, I have to admit, that I would be very frustrated with some of the long and drawn out arguments back and forth between some characters. I put myself in Hans's position and I just let some of that wash over me in one ear and out the other. I didn't think too hard about the hardest lessons, but was instead just trying to go along with Hans as he lived his life. It starts out that he arrives to visit his cousin, who has been in the sanatorium for several months, and it's in Davos, Switzerland. Hans is from Germany. He's 23. He's just about ready to start his career as an engineer. So he's all set. He has a position, and he decides he wants to visit his cousin Joachim in the sanatorium before he starts this lifelong career as an engineer. And very, very soon it becomes apparent that Hans actually has tuberculosis, and he has been coughing a lot. He even has a little bit of blood, and so it doesn't take long for him to start living the life of a patient, and he intends to do it for just the 3 weeks to try and feel better, living his life with his cousin, the very unrigorous life of a patient in this sanatorium, which includes 5 meals, sumptuous meals a day, lying down a lot on balconies wrapped up in fur and looking at the sky and just trying to get better with the rest cure. It also would include maybe lectures from the doctors there, and maybe a walk or two, very unstrenuous. They were supposed to just be very mellow and quiet the entire time. And the longer the three, as you know, it takes a long chunk of time in the book for this 3 weeks to pass. And by the time, it's not giving anything away, by the time those 3 weeks are finally over, he is a patient and he has to stay. And he chooses to stay because he wants to get better. He clearly is sick and he wants to be there with his cousin. And from there on, over the next 7 years of his confinement in this hospital, everything happens. He gets a crush, he falls in love, he's irritated. There are 7 eating tables within the dining hall, and he starts out at one, and he observes all the other patients and their idiosyncrasies. And this one woman who he cannot stand at the beginning slams the door every time he is trying to eat, and that slam just infuriates poor Hans. And so much time is spent observing the way he observes other people and the way they all categorize themselves. There's a table of Russians that's called the good Russians table. There's a table of Russians called the bad Russians table, and all in between. So he's sitting with these different people, and they just talk and they think about life, and they just live together. And so it's an experience. I, as a reader, experienced the Magic Mountain along with Hans and along with all of his friends and his cousin, his doctors. He has a couple of uncles, and they very soon kind of forget all about Hans as he stays longer and longer. One uncle does come to try and persuade him to leave at some point, and no, he isn't able to do it. And so he hears virtually nothing from his uncles past that time. And so his whole entire life is just ensconced with these people in this circumstance. They hear things about life on the outside, newspapers, and all of the upheaval that Europe is starting to undergo. But he is just committed to staying right there in the hospital. So let me just tell you about 2 chapters that I absolutely loved in this book, and that made it completely worth it for me to have gone through the entire process of sticking with this book. And that is the chapter called Snow, where Hans is feeling pretty good and he decides he wants to teach himself to ski, which is forbidden. The patients are not supposed to be doing anything rigorous and not supposed to do any kind of sports whatsoever. But he decides that he wants to learn how to ski. And so he starts these little trips, learning how to maneuver on the skis and, not get in trouble with the hospital. But one day he goes out and he gets completely lost. And then a blizzard comes. And so he is kind of stuck up at this little cabin at the top of a mountain, not knowing exactly what is going to happen to him, if he's going to be able to make it. He leaves and he finds he's just walking in a big circle, and so he just stops. And then he falls into a very deep sleep and has the dream of his lifetime, a dream that is so well described, and it essentially gives him the meaning of life, which is that love will always conquer death. But it takes a long time to get there. And then he feels so fulfilled when he wakes up and he is able to find his way back. But then by the end of the chapter, he has completely forgotten the whole experience of the dream and the whole meaning of it. So it was just so, that was just such a great chapter. And then the next chapter is called A Good Soldier. And that's a chapter where someone important in Hans's life at the hospital had left for a while to fight in the war and has gotten sick again and has to come back. And so it's the process of his dying. And that chapter is also, it took all of the humor that you'd been seeing all the way through and kind of shed it to the side and let the true meaning of death for someone you love kind of really hit home. And it was great. And the first time I read the ending chapter of the book, I think I was rushing. I think I was just so maybe fatigued from reading the entire narrative. And then I finally decided so when I came to the end of it, I thought, this doesn't come together. I don't know what this all means. And I was kind of mad at the ending. And then I reread it again. And no, it really was something much more profound than I gave it credit for. So I don't want to give anything away, but if you are at all interested in reading this book, I think you should do it at some point, because there was just, the whole of life was in here. You really do care about Hans, but we laugh at Hans. That you're in league with the narrator, and we are sitting on the sidelines, and he is joking with us as we're watching what's happening. And I just love the whole ethos of it, the feel of it, and I'm really glad I read it. So yeah, this was the best book I read this summer for sure. And in relation to the whole reason I wanted to read this book, Colm Toibin, the Irish writer, tomorrow is coming out with a novel that is about the life of Thomas Mann, and I read that. And so I think that as companion books, I probably got much more out of both of them from having read this Magic Mountain first and then read the Tóibín book, which has gotten a little bit of criticism that I've seen, that it's just basically a retelling of his biography, of Mann's biography, and I just disagree with that. He is able to write so many different genres of books. So if, for instance, you're interested in reading a coming-of-age story, then you read Brooklyn. And if you're interested in reading a woman in middle age who loses her husband and has to kind of reevaluate her life and pick up the pieces, then you read Nora Webster. Or if you're interested in AIDS in the 80s and in Ireland, then you read The Blackwater Lightship. And if you're interested in Greek retellings, there's a really great retelling of the Agamemnon Clytemnestra tragedy in House of Names. Or if you're interested in a little brief foray into the mind of Mary, mother of Jesus, then you read that book. So he has written so many books. They're all, not in all of them, but in most of them, there are a lot of queer characters. There is a look at life that isn't just head on. You look at it from the side. You look at closeted people or people who can't talk about their queerness as well. And that's not true of every single book, but it is true of The Magician, which is about Thomas Mann. And it was also true of The Master, which was about the life of Henry James. And I just really admired and loved both of those books very much. So The Magician, the writing is really lively, and I almost feel like it has the taste of German about it. And I'm not exactly sure why I say that, except for that it had some of the same kind of energy of the Magic Mountain. It didn't have the jokes, and it didn't have the omniscient narrator who is joking with us the whole time. But it did have a liveliness to it that I don't remember seeing in some of the other Tóibín books I've read. So it covers the entire life of Thomas Mann and talks a lot about his fluctuating political beliefs, but mostly it's about the relationships in his life. I mean, it is about the books he's writing, but it's also about him and his sexuality, which is very closeted, although people do recognize that, he's attracted to men, but it's not just like a forthright way of living his life. He's married. He has 6 children. Some of his children are gay. There is a gender fluidity to his first 2 children. So I don't know that you would have maybe read that in some of his other biographies, but Tóibín really kind of latches onto that element of Mann's life, as well as his great marriage to his wife Katerina, and then his relationship with his brother Heinrich, which was very strained during the First World War because Thomas Mann was very patriotic and didn't want to really take sides or condemn Germany for their part in World War I. He tried to just skirt the line and really not get political, and his children were mad at him for not getting political. And then by the time Hitler had started to come into power and he was seeing what was actually going to happen, then he started to take more of a side, well, he took much more of a side and eventually made this very important speech where he renounced what was happening, and he wasn't able to come back to Germany after that to live. So he was exiled during World War II. He lived in Switzerland for a time, then he ended up coming to the United States, and he actually met with Franklin Roosevelt, and they wanted to use him as a propagandist, in a sense, to speak out against Germany during the war. And I just didn't realize the impact that Thomas Mann had on people at the time, how influential his novels were to the German people, and then his speeches, and then how angry they were for turning on the German cause and the Nazi regime when it happens. So if you're interested in novels about novelists, and you have any interest in what happened in World War II in Germany from the German perspective, and from someone who was influential in German politics and in German literature, I would recommend reading this book, and I think it's really informative. My husband and I have been on this kind of crazy World War II summer. So we watched Band of Brothers. We're like, had never seen it before. And then we ended up watching a Netflix documentary called World War II in Color, which, you know, I've always kind of looked down on the History Channel for showing nothing but like Hitler stuff. But I'd never really learned about the war from beginning to end, how it started, all the different fronts that it had, and how all the countries got involved one by one. And this particular documentary is a British documentary. So it, you know, the Americans are featured in some of it, but also not glorified in the way that maybe an American documentary might do. So that was good. Also, it was colorized, which I also used to look down on, but now I just see that it really does kind of help give depth to the film, so that you see what's happening much better if it's in color than you do maybe if it's just in kind of grainy gray, black and white, where things are muddied. And this really brings some kind of focus into what's happening. We also watched this weird documentary about Hitler's last days in the bunker, what actually happened, which was horrifying. And now we're watching a documentary on Netflix about 9/11, and it's called Turning Point and 9/11 and the Aftermath, which I mean, it's incredibly traumatic in many ways. I mean, the whole coverage of 9/11, what happened, the anniversaries coming up, bringing us back 20 years to remembering how we processed what happened on 9/11, and then also the horrible war that happened in the aftermath, and how the United States really changed its policies and started going against what we thought were supposed to be American ideals of anti-torture, and it's been very disturbing, but it's been really enlightening. And I was also reading this other book the other day that had some World War II. It took place during World War I and II, but the war wasn't in the forefront, and the main character was writing anti-vaccine pamphlets in 1918 to get people not to take, vaccines. And I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is what has happened in the past is returned, and we are living it again. And it's fascinating. Anyway, literature and film and documentaries and journalism, it all coming together. And I don't know what the conclusion to that is, but that's what we've been up to. I've really enjoyed these books. Let me know if you have read any Colm Toibin and you like any of his other novels, or if you have anything else to say about Thomas Mann or The Magic Mountain. But it was just a very edifying experience, and I wanted to do a video about it. So that's all I will say for now, and thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.